Lonely Hell's angel finds two little girls in the rain. His act of kindness changes their lives forever. The steady thrum of the motorcycle engine beneath him matched the rhythm of Tom Caldwell's troubled thoughts. Rain pelted his leather jacket, each drop a reminder of the life he'd left behind. The suburban houses lining the streets seemed to mock him with their perfect lawns and white picket fences, a world he'd never belonged in. His tattooed hands gripped the handlebars tighter as memories washed over him like the rain. The roar of his bike couldn't drown out the echoes of his past. The brotherhood he'd abandoned, the friend he'd lost, the guilt that followed him like a shadow. Tom's beard was soaked, water dripping onto his chest as he navigated the quiet streets. Here and there, people hurried inside their homes, shooting wary glances his way. He was used to those looks, the way mothers pulled their children closer when he passed by, how store owners watched him carefully through their windows. His size alone was intimidating enough, but combined with his tattoos and the motorcycle, he knew what people saw. Trouble. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The rain grew heavier, drumming against his helmet. Through the visor, the world took on a gray, hazy quality that matched his mood. He'd been riding aimlessly for hours, trying to outrun thoughts that always caught up with him. The comfortable isolation of his run-down apartment called to him, promising the familiar embrace of solitude. Street signs blurred past as he wound through the neighborhood. The houses grew larger, more expensive, definitely not his usual territory. Tom felt even more out of place here, like a dark smudge on a pristine canvas. His mind drifted to his own place, with its peeling paint and creaky floors. At least there, he didn't have to pretend to be something he wasn't. The bike's engine growled as he slowed for a red light, the sound echoing off the manicured hedges and brick walls. That's when he saw them. Two tiny figures huddled together under a small pink umbrella that was clearly losing its battle against the wind. Two little girls, probably no more than 5 years old, stood shivering on the sidewalk. Their fancy dresses were soaked through, their small shoes muddy. Tom's first instinct was to look away. Other people's problems weren't his business. That's how he'd survived this long. But something about their vulnerability made his chest tighten. One girl clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest, while the other held the umbrella with both hands, fighting to keep it steady in the wind. Their faces were pinched with worry, eyes wide with fear. He could just drive on. That's what everyone would expect from someone like him. The light was still red, giving him time to notice how the smaller girl's lower lip trembled, how they pressed closer together when a car splashed past them. The bigger one, probably older by minutes, given how similar they looked, tried to adjust the umbrella to better protect her sister. Tom's hands clenched around the handlebars, knuckles white beneath his riding gloves. He shouldn't get involved. He'd learned the hard way that trying to help usually ended badly for everyone. But those girls looked so lost, so afraid. They reminded him of another rainy day years ago when he'd chosen to look the other way. The memory of that choice still haunted him. The light remained red, as if forcing him to confront the decision before him. Thunder rumbled overhead, making both girls jump. The smaller one dropped her rabbit in a puddle, and her sister quickly snatched it up, trying to wipe it clean on her already soaked dress. Tom felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. The tough exterior he'd built over years of keeping the world at arm's length started to crumble at the sight of these two helpless children caught in the storm. Tom eased his motorcycle towards the curb, the engine's rumble softening to a low purr. The two girls huddled closer together as he approached, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. He knew how he must look to them, a giant of a man covered in tattoos, leather, and rain. "You girls okay?" he asked, trying to make his gravelly voice sound gentler. The bigger girl stepped slightly in front of her sister, protective despite her own trembling. "We're fine," she said, but her chattering teeth gave her away. The smaller girl sneezed, and Tom's heart twisted. He killed the engine and swung his leg over the bike, moving slowly so as not to frighten them. Even standing still, he towered over them like a bear. The rain drummed steadily against his helmet as he removed it, revealing his thick beard and the kind eyes he usually tried to hide. "It's not safe out here in this weather," he said, crouching down to their level. The movement made his leather jacket creak. "Where are your parents?" The girls exchanged glances. The smaller one clutched her soaked rabbit tighter, while the bigger one adjusted her grip on the failing umbrella. Neither answered. Tom shrugged out of his jacket, the rain immediately soaking through his t-shirt. "Here," he said, holding it out. "Put this on, it's still warm." The bigger girl hesitated, but when another gust of wind nearly tore the umbrella from her hands, she nodded. Tom draped the jacket around both of them. It was so large it covered them like a leather tent. "I can give you a ride," he offered, surprising himself. "Get you out of this rain." "Mommy says not to go with strangers," the bigger girl said firmly, though she pulled the jacket tighter around her sister. Tom nodded. "Your mom's right. I'm Tom." He paused, then added, "I fix motorcycles, and right now I just want to help you get somewhere dry." A car rushed past, spraying water onto the sidewalk. Both girls jumped, and the smaller one started to cry softly. "I'm cold," she whimpered to her sister. The bigger girl bit her lip, looking from Tom to his motorcycle to her crying sister. Finally, she straightened her shoulders. "I'm Maggie," she said. "This is Lucy. Can you really take us home?" "Yeah, I can do that," Tom said, relief flooding through him. He grabbed his spare helmet from the saddlebag. It would be huge on them, but it was better than nothing. "One of you can wear this, and one can wear mine." He helped them climb onto the bike, making sure they were secure. The jacket wrapped around them both, and Maggie held tight to her sister. As Tom prepared to start the engine, Maggie leaned forward and said something that made his whole world tilt. "Mommy says you're my daddy," she whispered, her small voice barely audible over the rain. Tom's hand froze on the ignition. His mind went blank, then rushed with 1,000 thoughts at once. He turned to look at the girl, really look at her, searching her face for something. But all he saw was innocent trust in her eyes, complete belief in what she'd just said. He opened his mouth, then closed it, unsure how to respond to such an impossible statement. The rain continued to fall, but Tom barely noticed it anymore, too shocked by those 6 simple words that had just changed everything. The motorcycle's engine roared back to life, but Tom kept it gentler than usual, conscious of his small passengers. Rain pelted his back as he carefully steered through the wet streets. Every few seconds, he'd check his side mirrors, watching the 2 tiny figures huddled behind him. Their small hands clutched his leather jacket like it was a lifeline. "Which way?" he called over his shoulder at the first intersection, trying to keep his voice steady despite the unsettling words Maggie had just spoken. His mind was still reeling, but he pushed those thoughts aside. First, he needed to get these kids somewhere safe. "Left," Maggie shouted back. Her sister Lucy had buried her face against Maggie's back, hiding from the rain. Tom navigated through the suburban streets, following Maggie's directions. With each turn, the neighborhoods grew progressively nicer. Modest homes gave way to larger houses with manicured lawns. The trees grew taller, their branches stretching over the streets like protective arms. The bike's headlight cut through the rain, casting long shadows across the wet pavement. Tom felt the girls shift behind him whenever he slowed for a turn. Their trust in him felt heavy, like a weight pressing against his chest. Here he was, a man who'd spent years pushing people away, now responsible for these two little lives. "There!" Maggie's voice pierced through the rumble of the engine. "The big white one!" Tom's eyes widened as he took in the house at the end of the street. It wasn't just a house, it was a mansion. 3 stories of pristine white siding rose before them, with tall windows and elegant columns framing the front door. A circular driveway wrapped around a decorative fountain, though the rain made it hard to see clearly. This couldn't be right. Tom slowed the bike, double-checking with Maggie. "You sure this is your house?" "Uh-huh." Both girls nodded vigorously, their helmet-covered heads bobbing in his mirrors. Tom guided the motorcycle up the curved driveway, the wheels crunching softly on the wet gravel. The mansion loomed over them, its windows dark except for a warm light glowing from what looked like a kitchen. The contrast between his beat-up motorcycle and this elegant home couldn't have been starker. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence made the rain sound louder. The girls scrambled off the bike with surprising agility, their shoes splashing in small puddles. Tom helped them remove their helmets, revealing their rain-dampened hair. "Come on!" Lucy grabbed his hand, tugging him toward the front door. Her earlier shyness seemed forgotten as she pulled him along. Maggie took his other hand, and Tom found himself being led up the wide stone steps by these 2 tiny figures. The girl still wore his oversized leather jacket, dragging it between them like a shared blanket. Their small feet left wet prints on the steps, and their faces were flushed from the ride. But what struck Tom most was how they looked up at him, with complete trust, as if they'd known him all their lives. Standing before the imposing front door, Tom felt increasingly out of place. His wet boots, his tattooed arms, his rough appearance, none of it belonged in this pristine setting. Yet the girls held onto his hands tightly, smiling up at him as if he was exactly where he should be. The heavy wooden door swung open, and Elena Weston stood frozen in the doorway. Her elegant posture and perfectly styled dark hair contrasted sharply with the rain-soaked trio before her. She wore a crisp white blouse and tailored pants that spoke of business meetings and boardrooms, not stormy afternoons and lost children. "Mommy!" both girls cried out, still clutching Tom's hands. Elena's eyes darted from her daughters to the imposing figure standing between them. Tom shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny, acutely aware of how he must look, his beard dripping with rain, his t-shirt clinging to his muscled frame, and his tattoos visible beneath his wet sleeves. "Girls, where have you been?" Elena's voice trembled slightly as she knelt to embrace them. "I've been calling Mrs. Henderson for the last hour." She pulled back, checking them over with worried hands. "You're soaking wet." "The babysitter got sick," Maggie explained, still holding Tom's hand. "We tried to walk home, but then it started raining." "And then he saved us," Lucy added, pointing up at Tom with her free hand. Elena stood slowly, her eyes meeting Tom's. He could see her trying to reconcile his intimidating appearance with the fact that her daughters seemed so comfortable with him. Water dripped from his beard onto the welcome mat as he cleared his throat. "Found them at the intersection of Maple and Pine," he said, his deep voice rougher than he intended. "Couldn't leave them out there in this weather." Elena's expression softened slightly. "Thank you," she said, genuine gratitude warming her tone. "I can't imagine what might have. Please, come in out of the rain." Tom hesitated, but the girls tugged him forward. He stepped into a foyer that could have housed his entire apartment. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors and elegant furniture. His wet boots squeaked against the polished surface, making him wince. "I'm Elena Weston," she said, extending her hand. Tom noticed her perfectly manicured nails as he carefully shook it, trying not to get her too wet. "Tom Caldwell," he replied, then added awkwardly, "though most people call me Iron." A flash of recognition crossed Elena's face at the nickname, but she quickly masked it. "Girls, go upstairs and change into dry clothes right now. I'll be up in a minute to help you." "But we want to stay with Iron," Maggie protested, still clutching his hand. "Girls," Elena said firmly, though her voice remained gentle. "Now please." The sisters reluctantly released Tom's hands and headed for the sweeping staircase, their wet shoes leaving tiny puddles in their wake. They kept looking back at him as they climbed, as if afraid he might disappear. Once they were out of sight, Elena turned back to Tom. "I really can't thank you enough, Mr. Caldwell. Would you like a cup of coffee? To warm up?" Tom's first instinct was to decline, to retreat back to his solitary world. But something in Elena's expression, a mixture of gratitude and curiosity, made him pause. The elegant surroundings felt alien to him, like he'd stepped into another world entirely. His soaked clothes were creating a small puddle on her expensive floor, and his massive frame seemed to fill the spacious foyer. "Coffee would be good," he found himself saying. "Thank you, Mrs. Weston." "Elena, please," she corrected, gesturing toward what appeared to be the kitchen. The warm light he'd noticed from outside spilled from that direction, making the mansion feel slightly less intimidating. Tom perched on the edge of an expensive-looking leather armchair, his massive frame making the furniture seem delicate in comparison. His wet clothes had mostly dried, but he still felt like he was tracking grime into this pristine space. The living room stretched out before him, all gleaming hardwood floors and tasteful artwork. A grand piano sat in one corner, its polished surface reflecting the warm light from crystal wall sconces. Elena returned from the kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She handed one to Tom, who accepted it carefully, conscious of the delicate china in his calloused hands. The girls had changed into dry clothes and were now sprawled on the thick carpet nearby, coloring in picture books. "Sugar? Cream?" Elena offered, settling gracefully onto the sofa across from him. Tom shook his head. "Black is fine, thanks." He took a sip, grateful for something to do with his hands. "So, Mr. Caldwell," Elena began, her voice gentle but curious, "what brings you to this neighborhood? I don't think I've seen you around before." Tom shifted in his seat. "Just passing through," he said, keeping his eyes on his coffee cup. "And please, just Tom is fine." Elena nodded, studying him over the rim of her mug. "Well, Tom, I can't thank you enough for helping the girls. I was so worried when Mrs. Henderson didn't answer her phone." "Wasn't nothing," Tom mumbled. "Anyone would have done the same." "I'm not so sure about that," Elena replied softly. "Not everyone would stop to help 2 strange children in the rain." Tom grunted non-committally, uncomfortable with the praise. His gaze drifted to the girls, who were now giggling over their artwork. There was something peaceful about watching them, something that made his chest ache in an unfamiliar way. "Do you live nearby?" Elena tried again. "Other side of town," Tom answered vaguely, not wanting to mention his rundown apartment above the auto repair shop, where he sometimes picked up work. Lucy looked up from her coloring book. "Do you fix motorcycles? Your bike is so cool." A small smile tugged at Tom's beard. "Sometimes. Been working on bikes most of my life." "What kind of work do you do?" Elena asked, seizing on this small opening. Tom tensed slightly. How could he explain his life to this elegant woman, The years with the club, the accident that changed everything, his self-imposed exile from the world. "Mechanic," he said simply, "when there's work to be found." Elena seemed to sense his reluctance and changed the subject. "The girls seem quite taken with you," she observed, watching as Maggie abandoned her coloring and moved closer to Tom's chair. Before Tom could respond, Maggie looked up at him with those innocent eyes that had first caught his attention in the rain. "Mommy says you're my daddy," she said clearly, her voice filled with childlike certainty. The coffee cup nearly slipped from Tom's hands. He looked up to find Elena staring at him, her eyes wide with sudden recognition. The elegant composure she'd maintained throughout their conversation faltered as understanding dawned on her face. "Iron," she whispered, the nickname finally clicking into place in her memory. Her expression softened, but confusion creased her brow as she looked between Tom and her daughter. Tom's throat went dry. The comfortable silence of moments ago had transformed into something heavy and uncertain. He gripped his coffee cup tighter, feeling more out of place than ever in this beautiful room with its beautiful occupants. The silence stretched between them like a rubber band about to snap. Elena set her coffee cup down with trembling hands, the gentle clink echoing in the quiet room. Her eyes searched Tom's face, looking for any sign of recognition. "Do you," she began softly, "do you remember me at all, Tom?" Tom's brow furrowed as he studied her features. There was something familiar about the curve of her smile, the way she tilted her head, but the memory stayed just out of reach. He'd spent so many years trying to forget his past that sometimes even the good memories got buried too deep. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said gruffly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can't say that I do." Elena nodded slowly, as if she'd expected this answer. She glanced at the girls, who were now completely absorbed in their coloring books again. "It was about 6 years ago," she said, her fingers nervously playing with the sleeve of her silk blouse. "At the Red Dragon Bar in Carson City." Tom's mind flickered with recognition. The Red Dragon. He remembered that place, the neon signs, the worn leather booths, the constant smell of stale beer and cigarettes. It had been one of his regular stops back when he still rode with the club. "You were wearing a blue dress," he said slowly, the memory surfacing like a bubble in dark water. "Celebrating something?" "My college graduation," Elena filled in, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "I was there with some friends. You bought me a drink." Tom remembered now. She'd been different then. Younger, more carefree, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of the elegant updo she wore now. They'd talked for hours that night, finding an unexpected connection despite their different worlds. "We spent the weekend together," Elena continued, her voice soft with remembrance. "Then you had to leave with your club. I never saw you again." The girls' laughter drifted over from their corner, a stark contrast to the weight of the conversation. Tom's hands tightened around his coffee cup, the warmth seeping into his calloused palms. 3 months later, Elena said, taking a deep breath, "I met James, my ex-husband. We got married quickly, and when the twins were born..." She paused, gathering her courage. "The timing... Tom, there's a possibility that you might be..." Tom's heart thundered in his chest as the implications of her words sank in. He looked at the girls. Really looked at them. Lucy had James's features, but Maggie had his mother's eyes, the same eyes that had looked back at him from childhood photographs. "One of them might be yours," Elena finally said, her voice barely audible. "Maggie, she looks so much like you." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Tom's world, which had been so carefully constructed around solitude and self-imposed exile, suddenly expanded to include the possibility of fatherhood. The weight of responsibility settled heavy in his chest, mixing with a cocktail of fear, wonder, and something that felt dangerously like hope. He watched as Maggie hummed to herself, carefully selecting another crayon from the box. His daughter. The word echoed in his mind, foreign and terrifying, and somehow right all at once. The little girl who had trusted him enough to climb onto his motorcycle in the rain might be his own flesh and blood. Tom stood, by the living room window, watching the rain continue its steady descent. Behind him, the twins lay curled up on the plush sofa, their small bodies intertwined like sleeping kittens. The storm had worn them out, and they'd drifted off while Elena had been making dinner, a meal Tom had barely touched, his stomach too knotted with anxiety to eat. He reached for his leather jacket hanging by the door, the familiar weight of it offering little comfort. His keys jingled softly in the pocket, and he could picture his bike waiting outside, ready to carry him away from this unexpected situation. "You're leaving?" Elena's voice was quiet, careful not to wake the girls. She stood in the doorway between the living room and kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The elegant businesswoman from earlier had softened around the edges, her blazer discarded, her hair slightly disheveled, looking more like a tired mother than a corporate executive. "I should," Tom replied, his voice rough with uncertainty. It's a lot to process." Elena took a step closer, her eyes drifting to Maggie's sleeping form. "I know it is, but—" She hesitated, twisting the dish towel in her hands. "Would you consider staying, just for tonight?" Tom's hand tightened on his jacket. "I don't think that's a good idea, ma'am." "Please," she said, and something in her voice made him turn to face her fully. "The girls are already asleep, and it's still pouring outside. Plus, I could use the help. James used to. Well, I've been doing everything alone since he left." Tom looked around the immaculate house, trying to spot what help she could possibly need. As if reading his mind, Elena gave a small, tired laugh. "Not with cleaning or anything like that. It's just, there's a broken window in the basement that's been letting in water, and the garage door keeps sticking. Little things that I haven't had time to fix. Things that pile up when you're trying to run a business and raise 2 girls alone." The mention of repairs sparked something in Tom. Fixing things. That was something he understood. Something concrete he could do with his hands, unlike the complicated emotional terrain he'd stumbled into. He glanced at Maggie again, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she slept. She had his mother's eyes. How had he not noticed that right away? The thought sent a wave of emotion through him that he wasn't ready to name. "I've got a guest room," Elena added softly. "Clean sheets, private bathroom. You could get some rest. Maybe look at those repairs in the morning if you're willing." Tom's resolve wavered. The idea of riding home in this weather wasn't appealing, and something about these 3 females made him want to stay, to help, to protect. It had been years since anyone had needed him for anything. After a long moment, he hung his jacket back on the hook. "Just for tonight," he said gruffly. "I'll take a look at that window and the garage door tomorrow." Relief flooded Elena's face. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'll show you to the guest room." Tom followed her up the stairs, his heavy boots silent on the carpeted steps. The guest room was bigger than his entire apartment, with a king-sized bed and windows that overlooked the backyard. It felt too fancy for someone like him, but he was too tired to protest. "There are fresh towels in the bathroom," Elena said from the doorway, "and extra blankets in the closet if you need them." Tom nodded, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. This wasn't his world, these high ceilings and soft carpets, but for tonight, he'd stay. For the girls. For Maggie. For the broken window and sticky garage door, for Elena's tired eyes and grateful smile. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Tom worked beneath the sink, his broad shoulders barely fitting in the cramped space. The pipe had been leaking for months, Elena had told him, creating a constant drip that drove her crazy during quiet moments. "Hand me that wrench, would you?" he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the cabinet. Little footsteps pattered across the tile floor, and a small hand appeared, offering the tool. "This one?" Maggie asked. "Perfect, sweetheart." The word slipped out before he could catch it, and Tom felt his chest tighten. He wasn't supposed to get attached, wasn't supposed to stay this long. But here he was, 5 days later, still finding things to fix. Above him, Maggie sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, watching intently. "Can you help me with my math homework after?" she asked. "The numbers are being tricky again." Tom tightened the final bolt and slid out from under the sink, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sure thing. Let me test this first." He turned the faucet on, and for the first time in months, there was no drip when he shut it off. "There we go. Problem solved." Lucy appeared in the doorway, her backpack clutched to her chest. "Tom, the fence in the backyard is wobbly again. Can you fix that too?" He found himself nodding, even as a voice in his head reminded him he should be leaving soon. But every time he thought about going, something else needed fixing. A squeaky door, a loose floorboard, a wobbly fence post. The list seemed endless, and somehow he couldn't bring himself to leave these things broken. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. After helping Maggie with her multiplication tables, Tom spent 2 hours reinforcing the backyard fence. The girls played nearby, their laughter carrying across the yard as they chased each other with bubble wands. The sound made something warm bloom in his chest, something he didn't dare name. Elena arrived home from work just as Tom was finishing up dinner. A simple meal of spaghetti and meatballs he'd learned to make in his younger days. The girls had insisted on helping, though their assistance mostly consisted of making a mess with the flour and giggling. "Something smells amazing," Elena said, setting her briefcase down. She looked tired but smiled when she saw the kitchen scene. Tom at the stove, the girls covered in flour, and somehow it felt right. After dinner, with the girls upstairs getting ready for bed, Elena and Tom sat at the kitchen table, sharing a quiet moment over coffee. The kitchen was clean now, all traces of their cooking adventure wiped away. "Thank you," Elena said softly, her hands wrapped around her mug. "For everything you've been doing. The house hasn't felt this whole in a long time." Tom shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the gratitude but warming under her genuine smile. "Just fixing what needs fixing," he mumbled. "It's more than that," Elena insisted. She reached across the table, briefly touching his hand before pulling back. "You're good with them, with the girls. They trust you." Tom looked down at his coffee, watching the steam rise. The past few days had changed something in him, softened edges he thought would stay sharp forever. Here, in this kitchen, with the sound of children's laughter echoing from upstairs and Elena's quiet presence across from him, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, like he belonged. Elena seemed more relaxed, too, her professional facade giving way to something more real, more vulnerable. She told him about her day, about the challenges of running her business, about the little victories and frustrations. Tom found himself sharing, too. Small things, safe things, but more than he'd shared with anyone in years. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Elena's garden as she and Tom walked along the stone path between her carefully tended flower beds. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming roses, and a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves overhead. Elena's heels clicked softly against the stones as she walked, her business attire a stark contrast to Tom's worn jeans and work shirt. She'd come home early today, something she explained she rarely did before he arrived. "It wasn't always like this," Elena said, pausing to touch a rose petal. "Before the divorce, I mean. I used to think I had everything figured out." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "Successful career, perfect marriage, beautiful home, 2 amazing daughters. I thought I was living the dream." Tom listened quietly, his large hands stuffed in his pockets. The tattooed arms that once made him feel powerful now seemed heavy with the weight of others' pain. "When David left," Elena continued, her voice catching slightly, "he didn't just leave me, he left the girls. No explanation, no goodbye. Just gone." She wrapped her arms around herself, despite the warmth of the day. "Do you know what it's like to explain to a 5-year-old why their father doesn't want to see them anymore?" Tom shook his head, feeling a familiar guilt gnaw at his stomach. He'd been that man once, the one who walked away. The memory sat like lead in his chest. "The hardest part isn't even the practical things," Elena said, moving down the path again. "It's not the logistics of being a single parent or managing everything alone. It's watching their faces every time someone mentions fathers at school. It's seeing them try to be brave when other kids talk about their dads." They reached a small stone bench, and Elena sat down, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "I threw myself into work after he left. Thought if I could just be successful enough, make enough money, give them everything they needed, maybe it would make up for what they lost." Tom settled beside her, careful to leave space between them. The bench felt small under his large frame. "But you can't replace a parent with things," Elena said softly. "No matter how many toys you buy or how many trips you take, they need someone who cares, someone who shows up, someone who stays." Her voice cracked on the last word. From where they sat, they could see into the backyard where Maggie and Lucy were playing with their dolls under the old oak tree. Their laughter carried across the garden, innocent and pure. Elena turned to look at Tom, her eyes searching his face. "I know this isn't what you signed up for," she said carefully. "And I know it's only been a few weeks, but—" She paused, watching her daughters play. "Have you thought about whether you want to be part of their lives? Permanently, I mean." Tom felt the weight of her question settle over him like a heavy blanket. He watched Maggie, who might be his daughter, playing with her sister. He thought about the way they both looked at him with trust in their eyes, the way they came to him with their problems, big and small. He thought about Elena's story, about the man who walked away, about his own past mistakes. But the words wouldn't come. He sat there, silent as the shadows lengthened across the garden and the girls' laughter echoed in the growing dusk. Evening settled over the Weston household, bringing with it the familiar routine of homework and dinner preparations. Tom sat at the kitchen table with Maggie and Lucy, surrounded by colorful worksheets and math problems. The warm glow of the overhead light cast a cozy atmosphere as pencils scratched against paper. "See, if you count these apples one by one," Tom explained to Lucy, his large finger pointing at the simple addition problem, "you can figure out how many there are altogether." Lucy's tongue poked out in concentration as she carefully counted each drawn apple. Meanwhile, Maggie worked on her reading assignment, sounding out words with determination. "Cat sat on the mat," Maggie read slowly, her finger tracing under each word. Tom nodded encouragingly, amazed at how natural this felt, helping with homework, being there for the little moments. "Good job, sweetheart," he said softly, his gruff voice gentler than he'd ever thought possible. The nickname slipped out without thinking, feeling right somehow. Maggie beamed at the praise, her small face lighting up with joy. She looked up at Tom, her eyes full of trust and affection that made his heart clench. "You're good at helping with homework," she said, then added with innocent certainty, "Mommy says you're my daddy." Tom's hand froze mid-reach for a pencil. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. The words hit him like a physical force, making his chest tight. He'd heard them before, that first day in the rain, but now they carried more weight. Now he knew they might be true. Lucy looked up from her math problems, curious about the sudden silence. Maggie continued to watch Tom with those trusting eyes, waiting for a response he didn't know how to give. His mind raced with memories of the past few weeks, teaching the girls to ride their bikes in the driveway, fixing Lucy's favorite teddy bear when its arm came loose, holding Maggie after she scraped her knee. Simple moments that had somehow become precious to him. Tom started, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain something he didn't understand himself? A floorboard creaked behind them, and Tom turned to see Elena standing in the doorway. Her expression was soft, understanding, as she watched the scene unfold. She'd clearly heard Maggie's words, and something in her eyes told Tom she'd been expecting this conversation to happen. "Girls," Elena said gently, "why don't you go wash up for dinner? I need to talk to Tom for a minute." The girls gathered their homework and scampered off, leaving Tom and Elena alone in the suddenly quiet kitchen. Elena moved closer, leaning against the counter. "She's been asking about you," Elena said softly. "Ever since that first day, she's had this certainty about you. Maybe it's not just coincidence that you found them that day in the rain." She paused, studying his face. "Maybe we were meant to reconnect." Tom gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. The possibility of being a father, of being responsible for these precious lives, overwhelmed him. The weight of his past mistakes pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. Elena reached out, her hand hovering near his shoulder but not quite touching. "Tom," she said quietly, concern evident in her voice. He looked up at her, his expression raw with uncertainty. The thought of committing to this life, to this family, terrified him. Yet the idea of walking away again, of leaving these girls who had somehow worked their way into his heart, seemed impossible. The afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Tom helped Lucy mix cookie dough. His large tattooed hands looked out of place next to her tiny ones, but he guided her carefully as she stirred the wooden spoon through the mixture. "Like this?" Lucy asked, her face scrunched in concentration. "That's perfect, kiddo." Tom watched as she worked, amazed at how such a simple task could feel so meaningful. Flour dusted the counter, and chocolate chips were scattered everywhere. But he didn't mind the mess. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, coloring in her book and humming to herself. Every so often she'd look up and smile at them, her eyes bright with contentment. These quiet moments had become more frequent over the past week, and Tom found himself looking forward to them, even as they made him increasingly uneasy. Later that day, Tom worked on fixing the garden fence while the girls played nearby. The familiar rhythm of hammering helped calm his racing thoughts. He couldn't stop thinking about Maggie's words from the other night, about being her daddy. The weight of that possibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. "Can you push us on the swing?" Maggie called out, pulling him from his thoughts. Tom set down his tools and walked over to the swing set. He gave each girl gentle pushes, their laughter floating through the air like music. His chest tightened as he watched them soar higher and higher, trust written clearly across their faces. But with each push, doubt crept in. His mind wandered to darker places, to his past with the Hell's Angels, to mistakes he'd made, to people he'd hurt. These girls deserved better than a man with his history, They needed someone stable, someone who knew how to be a father. After dinner, Tom sat in the living room while the girls played with their dolls. Elena worked late that evening, leaving him in charge. The responsibility both thrilled and terrified him. He watched as Maggie carefully dressed her doll, while Lucy created elaborate stories for her stuffed animals. "Mr. Bear wants to go on an adventure," Lucy announced, making her teddy bear dance. "Can he come to our tea party?" Maggie asked, setting up tiny plastic cups. Tom observed their innocent play, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He'd never imagined himself in this position, surrounded by dolls and tea parties, responsible for these precious lives. The domesticity of it all felt foreign, yet somehow right. Maggie looked up from her toys, her eyes finding his. "You're my daddy, right?" she asked simply, as if it were the most natural question in the world. The room seemed to grow smaller. Tom's throat tightened, and he couldn't find the words to respond. Lucy stopped playing, watching the exchange with curious eyes. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. That night, Tom barely slept, tossing and turning in the guest room bed. The question echoed in his mind, along with all his fears and doubts. By morning, he'd made a decision. He found Elena in the kitchen, preparing breakfast before the girls woke up. The morning light cast long shadows across the counter as she poured her coffee. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I need to talk to you." She turned, coffee cup in hand, her expression concerned. "I've been thinking," he continued, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. "I need some time to figure things out. I think I should leave for a while." Elena's hands trembled as she set down her coffee cup. The morning light that had seemed so warm moments ago now felt harsh and cold. "I understand," she said softly, but her eyes betrayed her hurt. "The girls will miss you." Tom shifted uncomfortably, his large frame seeming out of place in the pristine kitchen. "It's just temporary," he mumbled, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. "I need to think things through." Over the next few days, a heavy silence fell over the house. Tom spent more time in the garage, tinkering with his motorcycle, the familiar smell of oil and metal offering some comfort. The sound of his wrench clicking against bolts couldn't drown out the laughter of the girls playing in the yard, a sound that now caused his chest to tighten painfully. Elena kept her distance, speaking to him only when necessary. Her polite smiles didn't reach her eyes anymore. At dinner, she focused on helping the girls with their food, carefully avoiding his gaze across the table. The weight of unspoken words hung between them like a heavy curtain. Maggie seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere. She started following Tom around more, as if afraid he might disappear when she wasn't looking. Her drawings, usually full of bright colors and happy faces, now featured sad figures standing apart from each other. One afternoon, Tom found Lucy's teddy bear in the garage. The small, worn toy looked out of place among his tools. He held it carefully in his rough hands, remembering how she'd made it dance during their tea parties. With a heavy sigh, he placed it on a shelf, trying to ignore the way his heart clenched. Finally, on a gray Thursday morning, Tom packed his few belongings into his saddlebags. Each item he tucked away felt like another brick in the wall he was building between himself and this family. His leather jacket, once a symbol of his solitary life, now felt uncomfortably heavy on his shoulders. Elena stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching him pack. "Will you at least say goodbye to them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tom nodded, unable to trust his voice. He shouldered his bag and headed towards the front door, his boots echoing on the hardwood floors. The sound of small feet running made him pause. "Daddy!" Maggie's voice rang out. She raced down the hallway, her small face streaked with tears. Before Tom could react, she wrapped herself around his leg, holding on with all her might. "Please don't leave," she sobbed, her tiny body shaking. Tom's hands hung uselessly at his sides. Every instinct told him to pick her up, to comfort her, to stay. But the weight of his past, his doubts, and his fears held him back. Lucy appeared behind her sister, her lower lip trembling as she clutched her recovered teddy bear. With gentle hands, Tom pried Maggie's fingers from his leg. Each of her sobs felt like a physical blow. Without looking back at Elena or the girls, he opened the front door and stepped outside. The sound of Maggie's crying followed him down the path, each step harder than the last. The rumble of Tom's motorcycle echoed off the buildings as he rode through the city streets. The familiar vibration beneath him did nothing to calm the storm in his chest. Each mile he put between himself and Elena's house felt like another weight added to his shoulders. He pulled up to a red light, his hands gripping the handlebars too tightly. A minivan stopped next to him, and through the window, he caught sight of a little girl in a car seat, about Maggie's age. She waved at him with a smile that made his throat tighten. Tom quickly looked away, twisting the throttle as the light turned green. The city gave way to the outskirts, where abandoned warehouses stood like silent guardians of his old life. This was his world, not the warm kitchen where he'd helped the girls with their homework, or the garden where he'd fixed the fence while Elena watched from the porch. Here, among the graffiti and broken windows, was where he belonged. At least, that's what he tried to tell himself. Rain started to fall, but Tom barely noticed. His mind wandered back to the day he'd found the girls in the storm. If he'd just kept riding then, none of this would be happening. He wouldn't be feeling this ache in his chest, wouldn't be hearing Maggie's sobs echoing in his ears. A car horn blared, snapping him back to attention. He'd drifted into the other lane without realizing it. Tom corrected his course, cursing under his breath. Even now, miles away, they were in his head. Lucy's quiet smile when he'd fixed her bicycle. Elena's laugh during their late-night conversations in the kitchen. Maggie's small hand in his as they walked to the park. The old Tom would have never stopped for those girls in the rain. The old Tom kept to himself, nursed his guilt with isolation, convinced himself he didn't deserve better. But something had changed in those weeks with Elena and the girls. He'd started to feel useful again, needed. The walls he'd built around himself had begun to crack. His apartment building came into view, a dingy 5-story walk-up that had seen better days. Tom parked his bike and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, each step heavier than the last. The key stuck in the lock, like even his apartment was rejecting him. Inside, the silence hit him like a physical force. No cartoons playing on TV, no giggles from the next room, no smell of Elena's cooking. Just empty walls and bare floors, exactly as he'd left them. His single chair sat in the corner, a silent testament to his solitary existence. Tom dropped his bag by the door and walked to the window. The view hadn't changed. The same cracked pavement, the same graffiti-covered dumpster, the same stray cats picking through garbage. But somehow it all looked different now. Emptier. Colder. He pulled a beer from the fridge and sank into his chair. On the wall opposite him, a water stain had grown since he'd been gone. It reminded him of the leak he'd fixed in the girls' bathroom, how proud Lucy had been when she'd handed him his wrench. The guilt settled in his stomach like lead. He'd walked away from them, just like Elena's ex-husband had. Just like he'd walked away from everything else in his life when things got complicated. The beer tasted bitter in his mouth as Maggie's tears played on repeat in his mind. some protector he'd turned out to be. His apartment had always been his refuge, his escape from the world. Now it felt like a prison of his own making, the walls closing in with every passing minute. The silence that had once been comforting now accused him with every tick of the clock. The morning sun filtered through Tom's grimy apartment window, casting long shadows across the floor. A week had crawled by since he'd left Elena's house, each day blending into the next in a haze of regret. The coffee maker sputtered and dripped, filling his small kitchen with a bitter aroma that couldn't match Elena's fresh-brewed morning blend. Tom stood at the counter, staring at the newspaper without really reading it. His usual routine felt hollow now. The silence in his apartment seemed to mock him, reminding him of what he'd walked away from. Every little noise, kids playing outside, a car door slamming, a dog barking, made him think of Maggie and Lucy. He'd tried to keep busy, picking up extra repair jobs at the local garage. But even there, he couldn't escape. Yesterday, a woman had brought in her minivan, 2 car seats in the back decorated with princess stickers, just like the ones he'd helped install in Elena's car. His hands had shaken so badly he'd had to take a break. The coffee went cold in his cup as he paced the apartment. The familiar walls that had once felt like protection now seemed to close in on him. He'd catch himself listening for the patter of small feet, or expecting to hear Lucy's quiet voice asking for help with her reading. In the bathroom mirror, his reflection looked older, more tired. Dark circles hung under his eyes, from nights spent tossing and turning, haunted by Maggie's tearful plea. "Please don't leave." The words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of his cowardice. Tom tried to convince himself he'd done the right thing. What did he know about being a father? He was an ex-biker with a dark past, not the kind of man who belonged in their world of ballet lessons and bedtime stories. But the argument felt weaker with each passing day. He'd started taking longer routes on his motorcycle, deliberately avoiding the neighborhood where they lived. Yet somehow, he always found himself drawn in that direction, like a compass needle seeking north. Once, he'd even parked across from their house, watching the lights in the windows, imagining the family life continuing without him. The afternoons were the worst. That had been homework time, when he'd sit with the girls at Elena's kitchen table. Maggie would scrunch up her face in concentration, just like Elena did when she was focused on something. And Lucy would beam with pride when she solved a math problem on her own. As evening approached, Tom sat in his chair, staring at the wall. The TV remained off. He couldn't stand the sound of children's shows anymore. His phone lay on the coffee table, silent and accusing. He hadn't changed Elena's number, though he'd tried to convince himself to delete it several times. The sudden vibration of his phone made him jump. Elena's name lit up the screen, and his heart seemed to stop. For a moment he just stared at it, afraid to answer. Finally, his hand shaking slightly, he picked up the phone. "Hello?" His voice sounded rough, unused. "Tom?" Elena's voice was strained, tired. I probably shouldn't be calling." "Is everything okay?" he asked, sitting forward in his chair. There was a pause, and he could hear her taking a deep breath. "The girls, they ask about you every day. Every single day, Tom. Maggie keeps waiting by the window thinking you'll come back to fix something else. Lucy carries around that book you were helping her read." Her voice cracked, and Tom felt something break inside his chest. The pain in her voice, the image of the girls waiting for him. It was almost too much to bear. "I know I shouldn't tell you this," Elena continued, "but they miss you. They don't understand why you left." Tom gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles turning white. The weight of causing them pain settled over him like a heavy blanket, making it hard to breathe. Tom's boots scuffed against the worn carpet as he paced his apartment, Elena's words still ringing in his ears. The phone call had ended minutes ago, but the pain in her voice lingered, mixing with his own torment. He stopped at the window, pressing his forehead against the cool glass. The memory of Maggie's tiny fingers clutching his leg hit him like a physical blow. Her tearful face, those big brown eyes, just like Elena's, begging him not to go. He'd walked away anyway, convinced he was protecting them from his complicated past. "What kind of protection is this?" he muttered, his breath fogging the window. The girls weren't safer without him. They were hurting, and so was he. Tom moved to his dresser, where a small photo booth strip lay hidden in the top drawer. He'd taken it with the girls at the mall 2 weeks ago, when Elena had asked him to help with shopping. In the first picture, he looked uncomfortable, stiff. But in each following shot, his smile grew wider as Maggie and Lucy made silly faces. By the last photo, he was laughing, really laughing, with both girls hugging him tight. His hands trembled as he stared at the photos. What was he doing here, hiding in his empty apartment? Those girls needed him. More than that, he needed them. The realization struck him with sudden clarity. He'd been running his whole life, but for the first time, he had something worth staying for. Tom grabbed his leather jacket from the hook by the door, his movements decisive now. The weight of it felt different somehow, like armor being donned for an important battle. In a way, it was. He was fighting for something that mattered, a chance at the family he never thought he deserved. Keys jingled in his hand as he headed for the door, the same keys that had started his bike when he'd driven away from Elena's house, leaving pieces of his heart behind. But this time, they would take him back where he belonged. The evening air was cool against his face as he descended the apartment stairs. His motorcycle waited in the lot, its chrome reflecting the setting sun. Tom swung his leg over the seat, feeling the familiar rumble as the engine roared to life. This was different from all the other times he'd run away, from the gang, from his past, from responsibility. This time he was running toward something, toward the sound of little feet on hardwood floors, toward homework sessions at the kitchen table, toward Elena's soft smile when she caught him reading bedtime stories to the girls. The bike growled beneath him as he kicked it into gear. The wind whipped at his jacket, and the city blurred past. But his mind was clear. He'd been wrong to think his past made him unworthy of love. Those girls had seen something in him, something good, something worth holding on to. And Elena had given him a chance when anyone else would have shown him the door. Tom merged onto the highway, leaning into the curve. His heart pounded with each mile that brought him closer to their home. He didn't know exactly what he would say when he got there, but he knew one thing for certain. He was done running. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would prove to Elena and the girls that they hadn't been wrong about him. The exit for their neighborhood approached, and Tom signaled his turn. His grip on the handlebars tightened with determination. It was time to go home. The porch light cast a soft glow across Elena's front steps as Tom stood there, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was just past 5 in the morning, and the neighborhood was still wrapped in pre-dawn silence. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated, wondering if he'd lost his mind coming here so early. Before he could decide, the door opened. Elena stood there in a blue silk robe, her dark hair slightly disheveled, eyes wide with surprise. She must have heard his motorcycle. "Tom?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry it's so early," he said, his voice rough. I couldn't wait anymore." Elena stepped aside, letting him in. The house was quiet, except for the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Everything looked exactly as he remembered it, from the girls' colored drawings on the refrigerator to the small pile of toys in the corner of the living room. "The girls are still asleep," Elena said softly, leading him to the kitchen. She moved to the coffee maker, her hands slightly trembling as she filled it with water. "They've been asking about you every day." Tom's chest tightened. He sat at the familiar kitchen island, where he'd helped Maggie with her math homework just weeks ago. "I made a mistake," he said, "leaving like that. I thought I was protecting them, protecting all of you from my past." Elena turned to face him, leaning against the counter. "We don't need protection, Tom. We need you here." The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence between them. Tom stared at his rough, calloused hands spread on the granite countertop. "I've never had anyone need me before," he admitted. "It scared me, having Maggie look at me like I'm her father, knowing that I might actually be—" "I know it's complicated," Elena said, pulling 2 mugs from the cabinet. "But running away didn't make it any less complicated. It just made it harder on everyone." Tom nodded, accepting the steaming cup she offered him. "I kept thinking about that day in the rain," he said. "When I found them on the street, I could have just kept riding, but something made me stop. Maybe it wasn't just chance." Elena's eyes softened. "The girls think you're their hero, you know. Even Lucy, who isn't—" She paused, then continued. "They both love you." "I want to be here," Tom said firmly. "Really be here. Not just fixing things around the house or helping with homework. I want to be part of their lives. Part of—" He looked up at Elena, his heart in his throat. "Part of this family." Elena set her coffee down, her eyes glistening. "We can take it slow," she said. "The girls will need time to adjust to having you back. We all will." "I can do slow," Tom said, relief washing over him. "I'm not going anywhere this time, I promise." "Good," Elena smiled, reaching across the counter to squeeze his hand. "Because I don't think I could handle explaining to them why their hero disappeared again." Tom turned his hand over, holding hers gently. Through the kitchen window, the first rays of dawn were beginning to paint the sky in soft pinks and purples. A new day was beginning, and with it, the chance to build something he'd never thought possible. A family. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Tom stood at the counter, carefully packing lunch boxes for the girls. He double-checked that he'd cut Maggie's sandwich into triangles, just the way she liked it, and remembered to include Lucy's favorite apple juice box. These small details mattered now. 3 weeks had passed since his return, and he was slowly learning the rhythm of family life. It was so different from his solitary existence before, messier, louder, but somehow more fulfilling than he'd ever imagined. "Daddy Tom!" Maggie's voice rang out as she bounded into the kitchen, her backpack bouncing. The name still caught him off guard every time, making his heart skip a beat. "Can you braid my hair like yesterday?" Tom's large hands, more accustomed to working on motorcycles than styling hair, had been practicing braiding techniques he'd learned from watching YouTube videos late at night. "Come here, kiddo," he said, patting the kitchen stool. As he carefully separated Maggie's dark hair into sections, Lucy wandered in, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. Though she wasn't biologically his, she'd taken to him just as much as Maggie had. "Me next," she mumbled, climbing onto the stool beside her sister. Elena appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work in a crisp business suit. She paused, watching Tom concentrate on getting Maggie's braid just right, his tattooed arms a stark contrast to the pink hair ties he was using. A small smile played at her lips. The days fell into a pattern. Tom would drive the girls to school on his bike, after Elena had insisted on getting proper safety gear, then spend his mornings doing odd jobs around the house. In the afternoons, he'd help with homework, having discovered he had a knack for explaining math in ways that made sense to them. But old habits lingered. Sometimes, when the house got too quiet or too loud, he'd find himself reaching for his keys, the urge to ride away almost overwhelming. In those moments, he'd retreat to the garage instead, tinkering with his bike until the feeling passed. One evening, after the girls were asleep, Tom sat on the back porch watching the sunset. Elena joined him, 2 cups of tea in hand. She passed one to him and settled into the chair beside him. "You're doing really well with them," she said softly. "Better than I ever expected." Tom stared into his tea. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm pretending, like someone's going to realize I don't belong here." "But you do belong here," Elena said. She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about us, about what we had before." Tom's hands tightened around his cup. "That was a lifetime ago." "I know," Elena said, "but I find myself falling for you again. Not the person you were then, but who you are now." Her voice wavered slightly. "The way you are with the girls, how hard you're trying, it means everything." Tom sat very still, his heart pounding. The old urge to run flickered briefly, but it was weaker now. "I'm not good at this," he said roughly. "Relationships, feelings. But being here, with you and the girls." He took a deep breath. "I feel it too." Elena reached over and placed her hand over his. They sat in silence as the sky turned purple, both aware that something had shifted between them, something both terrifying and wonderful. Tom stood in the doorway of the girls' playroom, watching as Lucy showed him her latest artwork. His massive frame seemed out of place among the pink and purple decorations, but his gentle smile belonged perfectly. "See, it's our family." Lucy held up the crayon drawing proudly. 4 stick figures stood hand in hand, one particularly large and covered in what looked like squiggly tattoos. "That's real nice, Lucy," Tom said softly, carefully taking the drawing. His throat tightened as he studied the simple picture. Family. The word still felt foreign on his tongue. From the hallway, Elena observed the scene, her arms crossed. She'd caught herself doing this more often lately, watching Tom with the girls, trying to gauge if this peace would last. The past few weeks had been like walking on eggshells, everyone trying to find their place in this new arrangement. Later that evening, while Tom helped Maggie with her math homework at the kitchen table, Elena busied herself with dinner preparations. She couldn't help but notice how patient he was, explaining the problems over and over until Maggie's face lit up with understanding. "Mom," Maggie called out, "Tom showed me a trick for multiplying by 9. Want to see?" Elena smiled, but her heart clenched. The girls were getting attached. Too attached, maybe. She'd seen how devastated they were when Tom left before. What if he decided this domestic life wasn't for him after all? Tom caught her worried glance and seemed to read her thoughts. After Maggie skipped off to play, he approached Elena at the counter. "I know you're worried," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "About me leaving again." Elena kept chopping vegetables, not meeting his eyes. "Can you blame me? The girls adore you, Tom. If you changed your mind—" "I've been thinking," he interrupted, pulling an envelope from his back pocket. "Maybe we could do something together this weekend, all of us." Elena put down her knife and took the envelope. Inside were 4 tickets to the local carnival. She looked up at him, surprised. "I know it's not much," Tom said, running a hand through his beard nervously. "But the girls mentioned wanting to go, and I thought, well, maybe we could try being a real family. Out there, not just in here." Elena studied the tickets, touched by the gesture. It wasn't just the carnival, it was what it represented. Tom wasn't hiding anymore. He was willing to be seen with them, to claim them publicly as his family. "You'd do that?" she asked softly. "Ride the carousel and eat cotton candy?" Tom's lips twitched. "Already promised Maggie I'd let her pick the color?" He hesitated, then added, "I know I messed up before, leaving like that. But I'm not running anymore, Elena. This, you and the girls, it's where I want to be." Elena felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of worry she'd been carrying for weeks. She looked at Tom, really looked at him, his tattooed arms that now knew how to braid hair, his rough hands that could both fix motorcycles and dry tears, his eyes that held so much determination to get things right this time. "The carnival sounds perfect," she said, and was rewarded with one of Tom's rare, full smiles. Maybe, she thought, it was time to stop waiting for things to fall apart and start believing they could come together instead. The morning started with a broken coffee maker. Tom stared at the machine, his frustration mounting as he tried to fix it while Elena rushed around getting the girls ready for school. The quiet domestic scene felt suffocating, so different from his solitary mornings of the past. "Tom, could you help with Lucy's hair? I need to sign these permission slips," Elena called from the living room. He grumbled under his breath, abandoning the coffee maker. "I don't know how to do hair," he muttered, walking into the living room where Lucy sat waiting patiently on the couch. "Just a simple ponytail," Elena said, her voice tense. "We're already running late." Tom's large hands fumbled with the hair tie, making Lucy squirm. "Hold still," he said, more sharply than he intended. The little girl's lip trembled. Elena looked up from her paperwork. "Tom, she's 5. Be gentle." "I'm trying," he snapped, dropping the hair tie. "This isn't exactly what I'm used to, Elena." "Well, what are you used to? Running away when things get difficult?" The words came out before she could stop them. Tom straightened up, his jaw clenching. The old familiar urge to escape, to jump on his bike and ride until the tension dissolved, pulled at him. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Elena set down her pen. "Because every time something feels uncomfortable, I see you looking at the door. Maybe because this whole perfect family routine isn't as easy as you make it seem." His voice rose, causing both girls to freeze in their activities. "I'm trying here, but I'm not cut out for hair ties and permission slips and—" "Then what are you cut out for, Tom? Because these girls believe in you, they trust you, and I need to know if you're actually going to be here for them or if you're just playing house until it gets too real." The silence that followed was deafening. Maggie and Lucy watched with wide eyes as Tom paced the room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I want to be here, but everything I do feels wrong. I'm not father material." Elena's expression softened. "You think I knew how to be a mother right away? We all learn, Tom. But you have to be willing to try, to make mistakes, to feel uncomfortable sometimes." Tom looked at the girls, at their worried faces, and felt shame wash over him. He'd promised himself he wouldn't hurt them. Yet here he was, letting his fears poison the morning. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, first to the girls, then meeting Elena's eyes. "I'm sorry. You're right. I've been fighting this because I'm scared of messing it up. But running away, that would be the biggest mistake of all." Elena stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "We're all scared sometimes, but we face it together now, remember?" Tom nodded, swallowing hard. "Together," he agreed. Then, turning to Lucy, he picked up the fallen hair tie. "How about we try that ponytail again? This time you tell me if I'm pulling too hard, okay?" Lucy's face brightened, and she nodded eagerly. As Tom carefully gathered her hair, his movements gentler this time, Elena watched with a small smile. It wasn't perfect, but they were learning, all of them, how to be a family, one messy morning at a time. The doorbell rang on a quiet Saturday morning, interrupting Tom as he helped Maggie with her puzzle at the kitchen table. Elena, who had been preparing lunch, wiped her hands on a dish towel and went to answer it. Tom heard a man's voice, unfamiliar but confident, and Elena's sharp intake of breath. "David," Elena said, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" Tom's muscles tensed at the name. David, Elena's ex-husband, the man who had walked out on his family without a backward glance. He stood up slowly, placing a protective hand on Maggie's shoulder. "I want to take the girls for the weekend," David announced, stepping into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. His expensive suit and polished appearance made Tom suddenly conscious of his worn jeans and faded t-shirt. "I've been thinking about them, and I miss them." Lucy, who had been coloring in the living room, peeked around the corner. "Daddy?" she whispered, confusion clear in her voice. Tom's heart clenched. For weeks now, both girls had been calling him Daddy Tom, and he'd grown to love it. But seeing Lucy's uncertainty made him question everything. What right did he have to claim this family? "The girls have plans this weekend," Elena said firmly, but David was already moving past her, kneeling down to Lucy's level. "Hey, princess, want to go to the zoo with your real dad?" Tom's hands curled into fists at his sides. The word real hit him like a physical blow. He might not be their biological father, but he'd been here. He'd helped with homework, kissed scraped knees, chased away nightmares. "They're settled here," Elena argued, moving to stand between David and Lucy. "You can't just show up after months of silence and expect what? To see my own children?" David's eyes finally landed on Tom, narrowing slightly. "And who's this? The new boyfriend?" "Tom is more of a father than you've ever been," Elena shot back, her voice trembling with anger. "He's here every day. He knows their favorite books, their fears, their dreams. When was the last time you even called?" David straightened, adjusting his tie. "I see. So you've replaced me with some... What exactly do you do, Tom?" Before Tom could respond, Maggie ran to him, wrapping her arms around his legs. "Daddy Tom fixes things," she declared proudly. "He makes pancakes on Sundays and reads us stories and never yells." Tom placed his hand gently on Maggie's head, drawing strength from her trust in him. He might have doubts about himself, but he had none about his love for these girls. "Listen," David started, but Elena cut him off. "No, you listen," she said, her voice steady now. "Tom has earned his place in this family. He chose to be here, to love them, to show up every single day. The girls need stability, not weekend visits whenever you feel guilty." "They're my daughters. And they're my family," Tom spoke for the first time, his deep voice quiet but firm. "I may not have your fancy suit or your biological claim, but I love them. I'm not going anywhere." Elena moved to stand beside him, taking his hand. "If you want to be part of their lives, David, we can work something out. But it needs to be consistent, and it needs to be on their terms, not yours." Looking at Elena's determined face and feeling Maggie's tight grip on his legs, Tom felt something settle in his chest. This was his family now, not by blood, but by choice, by love, by showing up every day and doing the hard work of being there. The following week settled into a comfortable rhythm that felt both new and familiar to Tom. After David's departure, something had shifted in the household, as if the last shadow of doubt had finally lifted. Tom sat at the kitchen table, helping Lucy with her math homework, while Maggie colored beside them. 7 plus 5? Tom asked gently, watching Lucy count on her fingers. 12, she exclaimed proudly, beaming up at him. "That's my girl," he said, ruffling her hair. The words came naturally now, without the hesitation that used to plague him. Lucy giggled and leaned into his touch, completely at ease. Elena watched from the doorway, a soft smile playing on her lips. She'd been more openly affectionate since David's visit, as if his appearance had only reinforced her certainty about Tom. Now, she crossed the kitchen and planted a kiss on Tom's cheek, her hand lingering on his shoulder. "Who wants to help me in the garden?" she asked. Both girls jumped up immediately, homework forgotten. Tom followed them outside, where Elena had been working on a small vegetable patch. The afternoon sun was warm on their backs as they dug in the soil together. "Daddy Tom, look!" Maggie held up a worm, her hands covered in dirt. Time was when such a sight would have made Tom uncomfortable. The mess, the responsibility, the casual way she called him Daddy Tom. Now it felt right. "That's a good one," he said, showing her where to place it back in the soil. Worms help the plants grow strong. They worked together, planting tomatoes and peppers. Tom showed the girls how to pat the soil just firm enough, how to give each plant room to grow. Elena worked alongside them, occasionally catching his eye with a look that made his heart skip. Later, after the girls were tucked into bed with stories read and kisses given, Elena took Tom's hand and led him to the front porch. The evening was cooling down, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. They sat together on the porch swing, Elena curled against his side. "You're amazing with them," she said softly, watching the sunset. "I don't think I've ever told you that." Tom's arm tightened around her shoulders. "They make it easy," he replied. "Never thought I could love anyone this much." "Even me?" Elena teased, tilting her face up to his. "You're part of the package deal," he said, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "Best deal I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the swing creaking gently beneath them. The sunset painted the neighborhood in golden light, and somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter floated on the breeze. "What do you want for them?" Elena asked finally. "For the future?" Tom thought about it, about all the hopes that had begun to take root in his heart. "I want them to grow up knowing they're loved," he said, "to be strong and kind, to never doubt that they have a family who'll always be there for them." Elena's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. "And what about us?" "Us is good," Tom said simply. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." Elena snuggled closer, and they watched as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky. Tom felt the peace of the moment settle into his bones, the kind of peace he'd never thought he'd find, much less deserve. Yet here he was, with a family who loved him, on a porch that felt like home. The evening wrapped around them like a soft blanket as Tom and Elena made their way back inside. The house was quiet now, filled with the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of crickets through the windows. Tom's footsteps, once hesitant in this space, now moved with the confidence of someone truly at home. In the kitchen, Elena started making tea while Tom leaned against the counter, watching her familiar movements. The domesticity of it all still amazed him. How natural it felt to be here, to belong. "The girls asked if we could go camping next weekend," Elena said, reaching for 2 mugs. "Lucy's never been, and Maggie can't stop talking about making s'mores." Tom smiled, remembering how Maggie had bounced around him earlier that day, her eyes wide with excitement. "I know a good spot by the lake," he said. "Safe, not too far from home." "Home," Elena repeated softly, turning to face him. "You say that so easily now." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Because it is home. You and the girls, you're my home now." A crash from upstairs interrupted their moment, followed by a small voice calling out, "Daddy!" Tom was moving before he even realized it, taking the stairs 2 at a time with Elena right behind him. They found Maggie standing in the hallway, a fallen picture frame at her feet. Her bottom lip trembled as she looked up at them. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was trying to get my stuffed bear from the shelf." Tom knelt beside her, carefully moving the broken glass away. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" She shook her head, and Tom pulled her into a hug. "It's okay," he soothed. "We can fix the frame tomorrow." "Promise?" Maggie asked, her small arms wrapped around his neck. "Promise. Now, let's get that bear of yours and tuck you back in bed." Elena watched from the doorway as Tom carried Maggie back to her room, speaking softly to her about being careful around high places. Lucy was already asleep in her bed across the room, her dark hair spread across her pillow. After retrieving the stuffed bear and making sure Maggie was settled, Tom joined Elena in the hallway. She was holding the damaged picture, an old photo of the girls at the beach. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to worry about them growing up without a father figure. But watching you with them—" She paused, emotion catching in her throat. "You're so natural with them, Tom. The way they look at you, how they run to you when they're scared or excited." Tom wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Never thought I'd be anybody's dad," he admitted. "But those girls, they changed everything. You changed everything." Elena turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. The rough beard under her fingers was familiar now, comforting. "You're not just anybody's dad," she said. "You're their dad. The way they say it now without even thinking about it. It's because that's who you are to them." Tom's heart swelled with emotion. He thought about the little moments, helping with homework, kissing scraped knees, reading bedtime stories. Each one had slowly transformed him from the lonely man on a motorcycle to something more, something better. "I love them," he said simply. "I love you." Elena's smile was radiant as she stretched up to kiss him. In that moment, with his family sleeping safely nearby and the woman he loved in his arms, Tom knew with absolute certainty that this was where he belonged. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the water as Tom helped unload the car. Beach chairs, umbrellas, and colorful towels piled up in the sand, while Maggie and Lucy bounced around in their matching flower print swimsuits, their excitement impossible to contain. "Daddy, can we go in the water now?" Maggie tugged at Tom's shirt, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Let's get set up first, sweetheart," he said, ruffling her hair. "Then we'll all go together." Elena spread out a large blanket while Tom planted the umbrella firmly in the sand. The girls helped arrange their picnic supplies and beach toys, though their attention kept drifting toward the waves that rolled gently onto the shore. "All right, water safety first," Tom announced, kneeling to their level. "You stay where we can see you, and no going past your waists without me or Mom right there with you. Got it?" "Got it," they chorused, already grabbing his hands to pull him towards the water. Tom let them lead him, looking back at Elena with a grin. She followed, camera in hand, capturing the moment as the girls squealed when the first cool waves touched their feet. "It's cold," Lucy giggled, clinging to Tom's leg. "You'll get used to it," he assured her, holding both girls' hands as they ventured deeper. They jumped over small waves, their laughter carrying across the beach. Elena joined them, and soon they were all splashing and playing. Tom lifted each girl in turn to jump over the bigger waves, their trust in him complete and unconditional. Their joy was infectious, and he found himself laughing more freely than he had in years. After the water, they built sand castles together. Tom showed the girls how to pack wet sand properly to make towers that wouldn't collapse. Elena decorated their creation with shells she and Lucy had collected, while Maggie insisted on digging a moat around the entire structure. During lunch, they sat under the umbrella, sharing sandwiches and fruit. Sand got everywhere, but nobody minded. The girls told stories about their friends at school, and Elena leaned against Tom's shoulder, content. "This is perfect," she murmured, just for him to hear. Tom watched as Maggie helped Lucy wipe juice from her chin, the simple gesture of sisterly care touching something deep in his heart. These moments, the ones he'd never thought he'd have, now filled his days. In the afternoon, they took walks along the shoreline. The girls discovered tide pools, and Tom patiently explained about the tiny creatures living in them. He held Lucy up so she could see better, her small hand pointing excitedly at a starfish. "Look, Daddy, it's orange, just like your motorcycle." The casual way she called him Daddy still amazed him. It felt right, natural, as if it had always been this way. As the day began to wind down, other families packed up and left, but they stayed. The setting sun turned the sky into a canvas of pink and orange, its reflection shimmering on the water. The girls, tired from their day of play, snuggled between Tom and Elena on the blanket. Maggie's head rested against his chest, her eyes heavy with sleep. Lucy curled up in Elena's lap, still clutching a seashell she'd found earlier. The waves provided a gentle soundtrack to their peaceful moment. Tom looked at his family, because that's what they were now, his family, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. The lonely man who used to ride aimlessly through rainy streets seemed like a distant memory. Here, with the salt air on his skin and his loved ones close, he'd found his place in the world. The drive home from the beach had been peaceful, with both girls falling asleep in their car seats, exhausted from their day of fun. Now, settled in their living room, the family gathered on the oversized sectional sofa. The gentle hum of the air conditioning mixed with the soft sounds of the girls' favorite cartoon playing on the TV. Tom sat in his usual spot, the corner of the couch that had somehow become his over these past months. Lucy was curled up against his side, her beach-tousled hair still carrying traces of sand despite their best efforts to brush it out. She clutched her favorite stuffed dolphin, a souvenir from their day at the beach, while her eyes grew heavy watching the screen. Maggie sprawled across both Tom and Elena's laps, her head resting on her mother's leg while her feet pressed against Tom's thigh. Every now and then, she'd giggle at something on TV, the sound making Tom's heart swell. Elena caught his eye and smiled, reaching across to squeeze his hand. The simple gesture spoke volumes about how far they'd come. The house felt different now, warmer, fuller, more alive. Gone was the pristine, almost museum-like quality it had when he'd first arrived. Now there were children's drawings magnetized to the fridge, tiny shoes by the door, and the comfortable clutter of a family's daily life. "Can we go to the beach again tomorrow?" Maggie asked sleepily, though she already knew the answer. "Not tomorrow, sweetie," Elena replied, running her fingers through Maggie's hair. "But soon." Tom watched as Lucy's eyes finally closed, her small body growing heavier against his side. The stuffed dolphin slipped from her grasp, and he carefully caught it before it could fall to the floor. These little moments, the ones he'd never imagined he'd have, now filled his days with meaning. The living room walls, once adorned with expensive art pieces, now featured family photos. There was one from their first trip to the park together, another from the girls' school play, where Tom had sat proudly in the front row. Each image told the story of their growing bond, of moments shared and memories made. Elena leaned over and kissed his cheek, careful not to disturb the sleeping girls. "You're a million miles away," she whispered. "Everything okay?" Tom nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He remembered the loneliness of his old apartment, the empty walls and quiet nights. He thought about the man he used to be, riding through the rain that day, never imagining he'd find this. A family, a home, a purpose. The TV played on, casting a soft glow across the room. Outside, crickets chirped in the garden he now tended with the girls' help. Their bicycle helmets hung by the door, next to his motorcycle keys. Everything had its place now, including him. Maggie stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about sandcastles. Elena smiled, her eyes meeting Tom's with understanding and love. This was what healing looked like, not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in quiet evenings like this, surrounded by the people who had chosen him as much as he had chosen them. Looking at his sleeping daughters and the woman who had helped him find his way home, Tom felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. In the quiet of their living room, he whispered to himself, "Maybe I'm not as lost as I thought." I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.